Thank you, Brother Paul, for such a warm welcome. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you tonight and share some of the things that I feel very deeply about regarding the Book of Mormon and the restoration. The title of my class is, Did Jesus Christ Minister to the People of the Western Hemisphere? And this is to give evidence that Jesus Christ did visit America. And I believe that he visited all over these different places. We'll find evidence of that as we go along today. This is where I believe that the history of the Book of Mormon lands took place. And we'll give some evidence of that, although I've got several other presentations that deal with that in particular. Today we'll examine some of the evidence of different types. There are different types of evidence that come together to form a much stronger testimony of the Book of Mormon. We'll be looking at the Mexican national history and some of the things from Central America also. Since Paul and I have spent a lot of time in Mexico, a lot of this is going to be from that area, but I've also spent time in Central America and South America. And the First Nations traditions of North America and perhaps in Canada, archaeology of the Old World and the New World, biblical prophecy, and ancient Mesoamerican religion and mythology. And I better check and make sure that everybody can hear. I haven't gotten any feedback yet, so okay, I can see that. Thank you. There's been a lot of controversy about becoming a citizen here in the United States, and I thought it'd be nice to show you an official document that I received from Mexico about what it takes to become a naturalized citizen of Mexico. And this is the official document. I got it in 2009, and it consists of 100 questions. And the very first question is this one right here, and we're going to look at that. Deidad del México antiguo conocida como la serpiente emplumada, which means ancient Mexican deity known as the feathered serpent. Of course, they give us, this was all a multiple choice test, the easiest kind you can take, I guess. Coatlicue, Huitzilopochtli, Quetzalcoatl, and Tlaloc. And the answer, of course, is Quetzalcoatl, the subject of our class tonight. I find it interesting that the citizenship test in Mexico begins with this great personage that had so much influence on the history of Mexico and Central America and other places throughout the New World. It's interesting that the great mural painter Diego Rivera, when he was asked to paint the history of Mexico on the walls of the National Palace many, many years ago, he began the history of Mexico with this personage right here, who he depicts as arriving in a cloud shaped like a serpent. And there's all kinds of symbolism here that we're going to consider in this class. Another place down below that particular one, which was up here, shows a similar type of depiction with symbolism that's very similar. And then out on you saw the ball court there out in the Yucatan at Chichen Itza. The very end of that ball court has this engraving on it. It's of the equivalent of Quetzalcoatl in the Maya culture of the Yucatan, and his name out there was called Kukulkan. And we're going to find out that that's exactly the same translation between those two different Maya languages. And it's dated like this. I'm going to skip and go as quickly as I can because I've got a lot of slides tonight, and I hope I don't run out of time before we finish. This drawing here or carving was made hundreds of years before the arrival of the Europeans, the Spaniards. And I've colorized it so you can, if you can't see it very well with the drawing or with the carving by itself, you can see very clearly that this does not look like any Native American. It has the appearance of a different culture, especially the long beard. One of the professors down at the University of the Americas, Alexander von Wuthenau, he was an art historian of the ancient cultures down there. And he said that it's impossible to believe that things like this could actually be depicted accurately. Here's a piece of pottery that I picked up recently down there. That when you see and I don't like to use the word racial characteristic because I consider there only to be one race, and that's the human race. But a lot of people use that term. I like to use people group. But when you see the characteristics of someone from, for example, from Africa or from the Mediterranean area compared to other areas in the world, the Orient, etc. And when you see them depicted very, very accurately and correctly, it becomes apparent that it's not really feasible to think that someone who'd never seen that type of a person could accurately portray them. We're going to go to one of the Bible prophecies now. In Ezekiel 34, the first few verses start out like this: "Woe be to the shepherds of Israel that do feed themselves. Should not the shepherds feed the flocks? Ye eat the fat, ye clothe you with the wool. Ye kill them that are fed, but you feed not the flock." And we'll skip over to verse 6. "My sheep wandered." We're going to talk about his sheep now. And by the way, if I don't remember, I've got a brochure that I'm going to offer to send to any of you if you send me your email address or your mailing address. It's related to this. "My sheep wandered through all the mountains and upon every high hill. Yea, my flock was scattered upon all the face of the earth, and none did search or seek after them." And then in verse 11, it finalizes like this: "For thus saith the Lord God, behold, I, even I, will both search my sheep and seek them out." And then in Matthew 15:24, Jesus said about himself, he says, "I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel." And then in John 10:16, he says, "And other sheep I have which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd." And here I believe that Jesus was referring to Ezekiel 34, where he said, where the Jehovah of the Old Testament was speaking to them. He says, "I, even I, will go and search my sheep and seek them out." I believe Jesus was using that scripture and announcing that he himself was going to go and do that and seek them out. Here's a painting from one of the tribes of the Southwest of the United States, and it shows this personage that appeared to them suddenly. He's dressed in a long white robe here, and he has a cross on the back of his hand, and it shows him moving a mountain with the power of his voice. I like to think of that as a sermon in paint, because he spoke about this and said that if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can do such things. And of course, you've got to figure out what a mustard seed is and what kind of faith it has at that. Here's the name of this great figure in several different languages. The Nahuatl culture that was from around central Mexico, he was called Quetzalcoatl. The Maya of the Yucatan, they used the name Kukulkan. And the Quiche Maya of Guatemala used Gucumats. And another Maya tribe, they used Votan. Now, these words all mean feathered serpent feathered serpent, feathered serpent, but in different languages. They all say the same thing. We're going to talk about the feathered serpents here in just a little bit. In other places in the New World, in South America, the Inca called him Viracocha and Bochica, depending on the tribes there. When the Europeans arrived, there were hundreds of languages here, and that explains why there were probably many different names. Each tribe gave him a name related to the history of who he was and perhaps even where he showed up. These legends are nearly universal throughout the New World. And while Jesus was at Bountiful in 3rd Nephi, it's recorded of him as saying, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, that I have other sheep which are not of this land," and that was in the land of the city of Bountiful, in the land of Bountiful, "neither of the land of Jerusalem," the old world, "neither in any parts of that land round about whither I've been to minister." So he said, I have other sheep beyond you guys. "For they of whom I speak are they who have not as yet heard my voice." In John 10:16, he says, "They shall hear my voice. Neither have I at any time manifested myself unto them." He goes on and says, "But I have received a commandment of the Father that I shall go unto them, and that they shall hear my voice, and they shall be numbered among my sheep, that there may be one fold and one shepherd. Therefore I go to show myself unto them." These scriptures and the evidence that we'll see here in this presentation indicate that Jesus visited and ministered to many other groups of the house of Israel in the New World and in the Isles of the Sea, very likely where Rena was from, out there in Tahiti, in those islands. And he did this for an extended period of time after he spent the 3 days ministering to the Nephites at the city Bountiful. Now, he spent 3 days there at first, and he taught continually during that time, and he ministered to them. But there is a record in 3rd Nephi that he came back and he visited with the leaders of the church there on at least one occasion, perhaps others that we're not aware of. But I believe that this had to have taken place over an extended period of time where he visited these other sheep. Jesus describes these other sheep as not living in or near the city Bountiful. The descriptions of the visits to each tribe vary widely. If you go into the traditions of the tribes around the New World, they all have different types of traditions, but they all basically tell the same thing about who this person was. Those different visits appear to be the reason why the legends about Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, Gukumats, I like to call him QKG from these different names here, to indicate it wasn't just one person or one name that was important there. He's found all throughout the New World. And that's to indicate that these legends are so similar and yet distinct from each other. How many places did Jesus visit? How long did it take him? The similarities are based on the character and the teachings of QKG here, Quetzalcoatl, Jesus, I believe, while the differences are based on the circumstances of each visit. Jesus returned to visit with the 12 disciples that he chose during the first 3 days. Could the Messiah have spent the same amount of time ministering to his lost sheep as he did to the Jews in the New World, in the Old World? And I'm going to send you to Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 to 27 to do a little research on that. This may be a new idea. I've not heard it taught anywhere in the restoration. And if you've done that before, then we need to get together and visit about it. But I hope I can plant a new seed here and give you an idea that perhaps Jesus may have spent at least 3.5 years ministering to all of the different places in the South Sea Islands and the islands of the sea where he went, as well as north America, South America, and Central America and Mexico. We're going to look at cultural symbols now. Symbols are things that have to be learned. Language is symbolic. Art can be symbolic. And we should not impose our understanding of symbols on other cultures because they're learned. And if we haven't learned those meanings, then we may be imposing our understanding upon some other culture. When we learn the meaning of a symbol as we learn our languages, or we do that, we learn those meanings. And as we learn about our cultures, symbols may differ between cultures. They may have totally different symbols or meanings. Words and phrases have to be learned. So what does it mean when we say it was raining cats and dogs? Let's see if this is going to work now. I'm not sure as it's going to. Can this be taken literally, cats and dogs, or is it symbolic? Yeah, it's not going to show up. I had a graphic that was, it shows cats and dogs falling out of the air, but this guy with an umbrella. And I have not been able to find that again. This is a blow up of the paper that was used to learn how to become a citizen of Mexico. And notice it's got this symbol on here. That's the symbol of the Mexican government. We're going to show that. And then I've got a picture here of a government building, and the symbol of Mexico, you find it on their coins, you find it in the windows of government palaces, and in many different places, printed on their money everywhere. And it comes from their history and the history of the Aztecs, that actually they were latecomers. They were like one of the tribes, the Germanic tribes that conquered Rome hundreds of years after the time of Christ. They came in around 1200 AD from the north. And their history is that they had a vision. They were a wandering tribe, and they had a dream or a vision or a prophecy that said when they saw an eagle with a snake in his mouth sitting on a cactus in a lake, that they were to stop there and build their capital city. And that turned out to be Tenochtitlan, which later, when the Spaniards arrived, they tore down the city and they built Mexico City in its place. And it's very unlikely to think that there might be a cactus growing out in the middle of a lake, but that's part of their history. Now, what would that mean for other cultures? If they see that, every time they see that, they identify that. That's my culture. That's me. That's Mexico. But if you don't know that story, what's that mean to you? Well, not very much, really. It doesn't have any background meaning for you. And so let's consider some other symbols. Here's the sign of the fish. I'm sure most of you have seen this kind of thing before. The early Christians of Greece used this acrostic. It had the fish, and here's these letters, and they form the word ichthus. And an acrostic is where you take the first letter of each name and each part of the word, and that represents a word. And so this first letter, iota, here is Jesus, and the chi is Christ, the theta here is God's, and then Son, and then Savior. That was the symbol that they used. I'm going to go back to that for many centuries. And today still you'll see this kind of a symbol on the bumper of cars around the country. And it has to do with the fact that the early Christians used that, and Jesus called his disciples fish in one sense, and that he sent his disciples out to be fishers of men. And it became a symbol for Christianity, especially when they were worshiping in the catacombs. They'd draw a picture of that, and that might be the place of a meeting where the Christians were going to get together. later on, the Latin culture of Rome took on the symbol of the cross. It's a legitimate symbol. There's a lot of people who say, oh, no, you shouldn't worship the cross. Well, worshiping and using it as a symbol are two different things. The Christian cross came from the Roman culture, but it continues to be a valid symbol for the Lord's sacrifice. This is on the church on top of the Teocalli, or the pyramid at Cholula, Mexico. And one of the years that Patty and I lived in Mexico, we lived in Puebla, and every day as we drove by to go to the university in Cholula, we would see this particular church and all of the stuff around it. In fact, we drove over that pyramid that this church is sitting on every day that we went to school. Are there Christian symbols in ancient America? So let's consider that. And if they are, what would they be? And could it be that there are Christian symbols that we don't normally use? That's another thing to consider. Could it be that they have chosen symbols that are obviously Christian, that they're biblical, they come right out of the Bible, but we haven't chosen to use them as symbols? And I think we're going to find that to be true. I don't remember what year this was taken, but it could have been that first year that Paul and I were down there. This is at Palenque, Chiapas. And back in 1950, there was an archaeologist digging around up here in that part, and they found some holes in the floor, and they actually went in and pulled that stone up, and they found out that there was underneath there was a stairway, but it was filled with rubble. It took them 2 working seasons to dig all that rubble out, and they found a tomb at the bottom, the tomb of Maya King Pakal. And we're going to see what was on top of that. This is a replica of that you can see at the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. You can see that this huge stone tablet was laid on top of the sarcophagus of this king, and he was covered with all kinds of jade. If you ever go to Mexico City, don't fail to go see that museum. I think it's closed on Mondays, so be careful about that. Call ahead. We're going to look at that right there. Here you can see a cross coming out of the belly of a man. We're going to see a better example of this. This was actually shot in the pyramid back down in Palenque in 1968 when Paul and I were on that trip way out into the Yucatan. You can see the cross here a little better, but we're going to look at a drawing right now. Eric von Daniken, he's the Chariots of the Gods guy. Most of you have probably heard about that. There was a movie and then a book and all that kind of stuff. It's not a very reliable history. He made a statement that the tunnels in the pyramid at Cholula were discovered by the archaeologists, and they had no idea what they were for, but they figured they might have been dug there by ancient aliens or something, which is untrue. Paul and I wandered through those tunnels many times, and at least once. I had others when we lived there that we went through there constantly. Those tunnels were dug by archaeologists. They weren't discovered by the archaeologists. And von Daniken makes a statement about this. He says this is an obvious picture of a Maya king who's in a space capsule, and he's got his foot on a footpede. I have a recording of the movie. I snuck a recorder into the theater when that was going on back in the 1970s. And he talks about this, his foot being on the footpede here, and he's looking up into the heavens and getting ready to take off on some, and he says this is fire coming out of the back of his rocket. Well, that's just so much baloney, really. But you do notice a couple of things here. The symbolism of the cross is all throughout Palenque and many other places in Oaxaca and elsewhere. Here's the cross, and on top of this cross is the quetzal bird. I've colorized these so you can see them. Another interesting thing is, if I recall properly, this the hieroglyphics around the side here are in a chiastic format. Chiasm being an ancient Hebrew type of literary structure. From the top of that same pyramid where this was taken, shooting over to the temple of the cross, looking in the back of that temple is this engraving here, a tablet of the cross. Notice it's got a cross here and again the quetzal bird. So the cross and the quetzal bird seem to be associated together, as well as the feathered serpent and symbols of eternity. They're found all over the place in these types of representations. Now, before we make too many assumptions about this, we have to remember that the people who carved most of the inscriptions that we see now on these ruins, the outer pyramids, lived hundreds of years after Christ and were deep in what we would call apostasy. In the same way, the church that the Spaniards brought with them was also deep in apostasy. But both of those churches, both of those religious beliefs, even though they had lost a lot of meaning elsewhere, they still used some of the same graphic symbols that relate back to the original meaning of the symbols. And here's the Spanish priest here. Now this is a painting of Diego Rivera on the National Palace in Mexico City, one of the walls there. And he's holding up a cross also. These people had used the cross for a symbol of the same being, and yet this guy is kind of like the German army and the American army had Christian soldiers on both sides, and they were shooting each other in a war. We haven't learned how to get along with each other yet, and these guys are showing some pretty good examples of how not to get along. But in both instances, the symbols of Christianity had survived the centuries of changes. And of course, here's one of the other walls with depicting the Spanish conquest. And here's one of the Spanish priests that's got a cross on his chest there, and here's one in his hand over here, and they're burning these people that they disagree with. You suppose that is anything like being censored on the internet today? Probably so, only they paid with their lives. Anyway, now I'm going to be quoting from several different authors in this. One of these is Lorette Séjourné. Had an opportunity to speak with her by phone a few years ago before she passed away, but she was an archaeologist that did work on some of the ruins at Teotihuacan. And she wrote a book called Burning Water, and the subtitle is Thought and Religion in Ancient Mexico. It was, I believe, first published in French and then in Spanish and then in English, and the English title was Burning Water, and Myth and Man here. And in this book on page 25, she says, just as our era began with Christ, and so that of the Aztecs and their predecessors began approximately at the same time with Quetzalcoatl. And then in that same museum, we see a depiction of the ruins of Yaxchilan. Some of us believe that this is possibly the location of the city of Zarahemla. It's got a river going around it. It forms a great horseshoe around a peninsula in the river. This side over here is Guatemala, and this side over here is Mexico. So it's the borders between there. And there was, at one time, there was a huge bridge that was built across there. If you climb this particular, the largest pyramid there, and it's very tall, and it's one of the most beautiful ruins you'll have a chance to visit. You can only get there by either a boat or an airplane. The landing place is over in that area. You climb up here, there's 3 doors in this top area, and you lay down on your back in the middle door, And you'll see this above you on the lintel of the door. And you see the diagram of two people here. I've colorized them so you can see it better, and then I'll take the color away again. But you can see that this guy has a cross in his right hand, and here's a bird with great long feathers like the Quetzal bird, and more feathers on the bottom down here. And in his left hand, he has another cross with the same kind of thing, the Quetzal bird there. And this guy over here has one in his right hand with the bird with the Quetzal feathers on it. So the cross and the Quetzal bird are associated throughout these cultures, both in the Maya and the Nahuatl cultures. You can see those very clearly if you're looking for them. You might miss them if you're not. At the ruins of Monte Alban, Patty and I lived in Oaxaca for 14 years, and we could get on the roof of our house, both houses that we lived in down there, and we could see this ruin on the top of a mountain just across the valley there. This is Monte Alban, and this is on top of one of the pyramids. The edge of it is here, and it drops down about 30 feet or so. But here is not a depiction, but actually a real tomb that was made in the shape of a cross. This is the backside of the pyramid, and the entryway would have been right in here. And of course, it's the tomb was buried that deep right there that had something across this area to seal it off. And they opened it up so that the public could see it. A number of years ago, there was an earthquake down there, and it tore up a lot of stuff there. And so they've sealed this off so you can't get up there to see this anymore. We went out on a hike one day out east of Mitla from a little village called Saga in Oaxaca. And we had to climb up way, way up high on top of this mountain. And here was another depiction of a tomb in the shape of a cross. They're all over in the valley of Oaxaca. And it has, each one of them has these little symbols. They're called grecas down there. And they're characteristic with stair steps right here and a squared off stylized spiral. This is symbolic of this seashell that we'll see later. And it was symbolic of eternity. And it's found all the way through this culture. One of the other things that was interesting about Oaxaca is in one of the villages up in the mountains around the valley of Oaxaca that was Yalalig, the people there had 3 crosses on their homes, and the women wore a necklace with 3 crosses on them. And I'm not sure exactly when I bought this. It might have been in '65 on my first trip to Mexico. I think it was, and I bought it to give to my future wife, whoever and whenever that might be. And I finally gave it to my wife, and it's on the lamp up here today right now. It needs to be polished. But anyway, the Spaniards, when they got there, they were trying to figure out, well, how did these guys know about the cross, and how did they know about 3 crosses? You know, the story in the Bible says that Christ was crucified between 2 other people. And they finally came up with the idea that, well, it's probably that Satan came here first and he counterfeited Christianity among these people, rather than looking at the more obvious idea that Christian symbolism had come there before they got there. In this same book, Burning Water, Lorette Sejourné says this about Quetzalcoatl, that he was born of a virgin. And by the way, I've seen this in many other books that were written in the 1800s and before. This is not something that that came from the Spaniards. It was there long before that. This person and others that are in this presentation were not trying to promote Christianity. In fact, Lorette Sejourné was not a Christian in that sense. Most anthropologists are not. They've gone through some brainwashing about evolution and everything else, and they don't. Most of them don't even believe in God, let alone the Bible. I'm sure that Paul doesn't want to. That's not Paul's attitude toward the scriptures, or I hope not of any of the rest of us here. But Sejourné says this: as in the Christian mystery of incarnation, the spirit falls from on high to penetrate the body of a woman. And that's a literal presentation of how the virgin birth may have taken place. Louis Spence, in his book called Gods of Mexico, writes this: the birth of Quetzalcoatl was accompanied by the appearance of a new star and by mysterious omens in the heavens. And he wrote that book in 1874. This book right here, or this quote, comes from Lorette Sejourné's book, but she quotes it from this book, the Anales de Cuautitlan, Chimalpopoca Codex. And it was first printed in the University of Mexico in 1945. And that was printed first in Spanish. And I believe she was probably the first one to publish this in English. It says this about darkness that appeared at the death of Quetzalcoatl. It says, they say that when he died, dawn did not appear for 4 days because he had gone to dwell among the dead. And they add that he was enthroned as Lord. Well, the Book of Mormon has something very similar to that. It says that there were 3 days of darkness, and on the 4th day, the sun came out and it became light again. And 3 Nephi 4:21, it says, and it came to pass that it did last for the space of 3 days, that there was no light seen. And there was great mourning and howling and weeping among all the people continually. The Book of Mormon was printed in 1830 for the first time in English. That's pretty hard to say, that a Maya or a tradition from the Mesoamerican people could have known anything about what this book might have said. But it's an identical type of thing. There was 3 days of darkness at the death of Quetzalcoatl, as well as of Jesus Christ in the New World, at least. In the Popol Vuh, which is considered to be the sacred book of the ancient Quiche Maya, it says this: we shall bring it, that is our history, to light, because now the Popol Vuh cannot be seen anymore. Now this is from the preamble of the Popol Vuh, in which was clearly seen the coming from the other side of the sea, and the narration of our obscurity and our life was clearly seen. The original book, written long ago, existed, but its site is hidden to the searcher and the thinker. Now, this is the 1950 edition of the Popol Vuh in English, first time in English. And I like this one because it contains the preamble. Most of the other modern versions of the Popol Vuh, more modern versions of it, do not contain this preamble, which says that they came from the other side of the ocean, and it talks about the original book. Now let's talk about symbolism again. What do you think of when you see this kind of thing? Well, you think maybe danger, evil, perhaps, because of our own cultural bias of what we might think about what the Bible says in the book of Genesis about a snake. Could there be any other meanings to the symbol of a snake? Medical science, we know, uses the caduceus. It's got 2 snakes here, raised up on a pole, and wings here. You suppose that has any relationship with the feathered serpent? And it has the symbol for healing. Where's that come from? Well, it comes right out of the Bible. But the caduceus goes back even further than the Old Testament that we have. It's existed since the first civilization after the flood of Noah's day. This version comes from Sumer, several thousand years BC in Mesopotamia, and it has 2 serpents lifted up on a pole. This one has 2 leopards with wings on them, so the feathers and the serpents are a part of this. But we know that leopards don't have wings and feathers, and this is a symbol. You have to learn the meaning of the symbols to understand what they're talking about. And so we're going to show how these symbols relate to Mesoamerica. There's a lot of people who didn't want to talk about this feathered serpent in Mesoamerica because, in fact, it's all over the Americas. because they have misinterpreted the meaning of the serpent from the Bible. But in reality, we know that Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, he says, he, that is the Father, hath made him sin for us, who knew no sin, that we might be made righteousness of God, the righteousness of God in him. So Jesus was made sin in our place. The symbol of the serpent still has to do with sin, but the serpent that is lifted up is very different from the serpent that's not lifted up. And the wings on the serpents in Mesoamerica have to do with the fact that he's lifted up. Jesus said that he was like the serpent that Moses raised up to heal the people back in John 3:14. Everybody knows John 3:16, for God so loved the world, but the few people look at this and understand what it means. And as Moses, words of Jesus now, quoting out of the Old Testament, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whosoever believeth on him should not perish, but have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth on him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Okay, and then we go to the Book of Mormon. There's about 3 different places where this is expounded on in much more detail in the Book of Mormon, but it's telling the same story, and it's describing what they had learned as Israelites in the wilderness, because the people that wrote the Book of Mormon came out of Jerusalem 600 years before Jesus, and those people remembered probably even more of and plus they had the plates of brass of this event where Moses made the brass serpent and put it up on a pole. Yea, did he not bear record that the Son of God should come? And as he, Moses, lifted up the brazen serpent in the wilderness, even so shall he. Now this is in the book of Helaman, a couple hundred years before the time of Christ. Even so shall he, Jesus, be lifted up who should come. And as many as should look upon that serpent should live, even so as many as should look upon the Son of God with faith, having a contrite heart, might live even unto that life which is eternal. Okay, now let's take a look at the symbolism that we find all over Mesoamerica and North America too. The Temple of Quetzalcoatl in Teotihuacan, here are feathered serpents, the snake here and the feathers coming out all around him. This is my wife in 1970, Patty, when we went out to visit Teotihuacan, the feathered serpent of Quetzalcoatl. Paul, I think this might have been a picture that I shot when we were together out at Chichen Itza. This is out in the Yucatan. And this snake here has, the body goes way up tall, and then there's a rattle on the end of his tail up there. But these are actually feathers here. You can see them. I've colorized them again so you can see them better. This one has the same kind of thing out here. I'd like to go back now with a digital camera and get a better shot of them, but who knows when we'll have time to do that again. But this is obviously a symbol now. Snakes don't have feathers. It's a symbol. I'm pretty sure this was done when we were down there. This is at Uxmal in Campeche. This is a symbol of a snake. His body goes around here like this, and there's another one over here that kind of intertwines here, comes back over here and down to the rattle on his tail. This critter has a face in his mouth. But real snakes don't have feathers. Here you can see the details of the feathers on this. These are not scales, they're feathers. And real snakes don't have faces in their mouths either. This is highly symbolic. It's actually telling a story. And here at Teotihuacan again, we see something else over to the side, and that is a seashell. And when you cut the seashell like this and then turn it transversely, you see the following. You see a star. Now the star is an interesting concept that was found in Mesoamerica also. Paul, I think we were there when that picture was taken. This is from 1967. And the first time Paul and I saw each other on Zoom a few weeks ago, Paul had mentioned, he said, Frank used to have hair. Well, that's what my hair used to look like. But here again at Teotihuacan are the stars that represent Quetzalcoatl. And why would the people of the New World have used that? It's because the Venus star is a symbol, one of the symbols of Quetzalcoatl. And it comes right out of our Bible, Revelation 22. I, Jesus, have sent mine angel to testify unto you these things in the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David, the bright and the morning star. And so Jesus calls himself the morning star, which is Venus. You can go out and see it before sunset and before sunrise during certain times of the year. And it's usually the brightest object in the sky besides the sun and the moon, because it's the closest planet to us, really. And so we should not be surprised to find out that these stars, these crosscut of the seashell, which we saw on the depiction of Quetzalcoatl himself, the painting that Diego Rivera did, they're symbols of the morning star. And of course, the spiral here, we see that. The Grecas at Oaxaca are squared off, but they mean the same thing. They symbolize eternity. And of course, back to Diego Rivera, here's the crosscut of the seashell there, the scepter in his hand, the fact that he was a bearded person, the quetzal feathers and his headdress, all of these things surrounded by his disciples here. They have survived down to the present time, where even the great mural painter Diego Rivera back in the early 1900s began the history of Mexico with this great figure. Here's the crosscut of the seashell right there, the Venus star. Morning star. Now, another person that I have a number of quotes here from is Irene Nicholson. She wrote this book, Mexican and Central American Mythology. Now, mythology, we normally think that it doesn't, a myth is just a story. However, if you want to know where you came from, are you going to go back and talk with someone about myths about people that you think may have come from that area? Or are you going to talk about with your grandparents? Or maybe, I met my great-grandparents. And they told me they came from Sweden. Some of them did. Others came from England. But this person has gone in and done a lot of research as to where these people came from and what their symbolism is. And the mythology, I believe, has a lot of truth based in it too. We all have a mythology about our cultures. And in this, he says, the maize god, Cinteotl, is but another aspect of Quetzalcoatl. And so he wasn't necessarily another god, it's just another story about Quetzalcoatl. And so maize, of course, is corn, the kind of corn that our farmers in Iowa grow, and down here in Missouri and Kansas too. But what was made from corn? Well, they made tortillas out of that. And what was a tortilla? It was nothing else than the bread of life for these people. Now, the symbolism of Jesus, he said about himself, I am the bread of life. Now, the fact that these people of the middle Mesoamerica have used corn as a symbol for Quetzalcoatl is not surprising. The fact that Jesus called himself the bread of life, he's the source of life. And so the corn itself became a symbol for him. Now, the same author over here writes this about another god, the god K, that they really hadn't given a good name for, says may have been rather a god-man like Quetzalcoatl in human form. Some workers have identified him with Itzamna. He was also called La Quinchan, another name here, serpent of the east. There's the serpent there, and it came from the east, and was said to have been the creator of men and of all organic life, and to have founded the Maya culture. She continues here. He invented writing and books, had a knowledge of herbs and of healing, and some say that he was the son of Unabku, the invisible god above all. Interesting. Now, this magazine, Año Cero, Year Zero, was a popular magazine when Patty and I were living down in Mexico. It started in the year 2000. I don't remember what year exactly this was. I used portions of the front cover of it. But the main article in this magazine was Quetzalcoatl, El Cristo que llegó a Mexico. And I'm going to tell you what I think about it in advance, and then you can make up your own mind. This secular magazine contains an article about Quetzalcoatl and compares him to Jesus Christ. The fact that the author refuses to believe that it was actually Jesus is easy to understand, because most secular writers don't accept Jesus Christ as the Son of God or even believe in the Bible. And so here's the article here laid out. El Cristo que llegó a Mexico, the mysterious legend of the plumed serpent, feathered serpent. And they're quoting here from Lorette Séjourné. And this was sometime after the year 2000. One of our church members down there bought this magazine off the shelf and brought it to me, and I photographed it, scanned it. I never could find another copy of it, but it's great that I got this. The Christ that came to Mexico. And then this right here says, the myth of the Mesoamerican god Quetzalcoatl reproduces with every detail the symbolism that we observe in the Christian Messiah. How interesting. This graphic from that book, that magazine, and also from, they copied it from Lorette Séjourné's book, showing that he died for his people as a self-sacrifice. It looks similar to a cross. These footprints here represent the four directions of the wind. Also, Matthew 16, Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And in Colossians 1:15, Jesus Christ is the image of the invisible God, and that's exactly what was said previously here. Now, getting back to Lorette Séjourné, she talks about the seashell as being the morning star. This representation comes out of an Aztec codex, a drawing that survived the Spanish conquest, and it's been colorized here so that you can see these different things easier. But if I'd have just shown you this earlier without the background that you've already had, you probably would not have recognized that as the crosscut of the seashell, which represents the morning star, Venus. And you may not have seen this as a cross either on the shield here, or the quetzal feathers here and here, the scepter here, or this. Now, this had to be explained in the book, but she gets this information from the people who did these drawings, the ancient Mexican culture. She says this is a representation of resurrection. She uses that word, resurrection. And this is supposed to be the bone of a dead, the leg bone, knee and upper and lower part of the leg of a human being. And these are flowers that also represent a heart. Now, remember, this is a culture that's also in apostasy, and they were practicing things that we wouldn't practice. But here's a bird that looks like he's drinking nectar out of this flower in kind of the same way that a hummingbird might. But here is the evidence that this is really the quetzal bird. So all of these symbols here go together to show this is the Quetzalcoatl of that culture. Back to Nicholson, she says, "It is a universal tragedy that we know so little about this great religious leader, Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, plume serpent, quetzal bird, Venus and sun god, who sacrificed himself that true manhood might be created in the hemisphere of the West. The culture of this, which is The culture which this mysterious leader established shines down to our day. Its message is still meaningful for those who will take the trouble to make their way through the difficulties of the outlandish names and ramblings manuscripts to the essence of the myth. Again, she's talking about mythology here. The fact that the Mayas could so quickly accept a Christian doctrine suggests that it was not incompatible with their own religion. As we shall see later, there were a number of parallels between Maya and Christian thought, including the symbolism of the cross and of the idea of resurrection. Death, the idea of death and resurrection here. Laurette Séjourné, she says, now speaking about Séjourné, a French archaeologist living and working in Mexico, believes that Quetzalcoatl was a king living about the time of Christ. And back to Séjourné now, she says, it is surprising to notice how just as with baptism and the remission of sins, these are her words now, investigators have usually only given passing attention to the fact that the Mesoamerican peoples practiced the sacrament of communion. Now,
On these occasions, priests from the temples brought before the people with much solemnity an image of their deity, made of the flour of maize. By means of certain ceremonies of singing and dancing, the image was blessed and consecrated.
This is from the movie that the church produced back in the 1940s, and the narrator was Evan Frye.
The priests and superiors of the temple then stripped the image of its ornaments and broke the bread into pieces. After first receiving this bread themselves, the priests gave it to the people in the manner of communion. Both men and women and children did receive this bread with great reverence, declaring they did eat the flesh of God.
Okay, here's the symbol of Quetzalcoatl in various different places. This bird right here is found on the monetary unit of Guatemala. Their monetary unit is the Quetzal, and they use that as their national symbol. Quetzalcoatl, the name Quetzal comes from this bird right here, mostly in Guatemala right now, a special bird. The word coatl means snake or serpent. And this is from the Palace of Cortez down in Cuernavaca, where it's no longer found, but it refers to all of this. You see this symbol here, the scepter, the beard, the quetzal feathers, and all of this. I know I'm running out of time here, so I'm just about finished. Laurette Séjourné says Quetzalcoatl appears to be the god of life, constant benefactor of humanity. And Nicholson says Quetzalcoatl was described as being the source of life and light for our planet. Again, neither one of these authors, they were both archaeologists, but neither one of them had anything to do with the restoration. And probably not much to do with Christianity. So Quetzalcoatl was the creator god. He was born of a virgin, We've seen there's evidence that he lived approximately 2,000 years ago, died for his creation, descended and ascended in a cloud. He promised to return. His attributes were the son of the invisible God above all, created mankind, the source of knowledge, associated with a new star. He was bearded, 3 days of darkness at his death. His symbols were the feathered serpent, the morning star, the cross, maize or corn, which was the bread of life to them, resurrection. Now, the evidence that we've examined here, types of evidence from various different places, produce a very strong evidence that there is the idea that Christ may have come here is very likely to be true if you're talking to someone who's never experienced this before, never looked at it. We've looked at Mexican national history, Central American also, some of the First Nations traditions. I've got other classes that talk about them. Archaeology of both the Old and New World, biblical prophecy, and there's really a lot more of all of these, and ancient Mesoamerican religion and mythology. Now I could read this. I know that many of you have already read this before. If we have time, Paul, do we have time to read one scripture here? It's
we're about 8 minutes.
A quote from
class time.
Third Nephi. I can't hear. Your mouth is moving. Need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, we're about 8 minutes over.
Can't hear anything here.
But I haven't seen anyone leaving, and people are entitled to leave if they need to. So yeah, the class time regularly would be.
Maybe the reason you haven't stopped me is because I can't hear you. I think I'm a few minutes over time. These and many other evidences indicate that Jesus Christ appeared in Mexico and in many other places of the New World about 2,000 years ago. I'll stop here and turn it back over to you, Paul. It's the voice that Jesus spoke from the cloud, from the darkness, or from the heavens as he descended in the New World to visit with the Nephites.
Thank you so much.
So